Drawing hands becomes much easier when we look at them as a series of logical shapes. Today, I'm sharing a double box construction system and 5 rules of thumb, pun intended, to explain the basic and most important proportions of a hand. So let's dive right in. Rule number 1, the 1-to-1 ratio. A helpful starting point is to block in the palm as a rectangle, then add a second one on top of the same height for the fingers. While the palm and middle finger share this 1-to-1 ratio, this is where the webbing trap comes into play. Some people get this confused and measure from the visible base of the finger on the palm side, but that isn't the true midpoint of the hand. Instead, they meet at the center of the base knuckle. This is the anatomical landmark, where the metacarpal bone ends and the finger begins. Because the skin webbing on the palm side sits higher than this hinge, it creates an illusion, making the fingers look much shorter on the palm side than they do from the back. To get the proportions right, you have to measure from those bony knuckles on the back where the finger actually hinges. I'll show you a step-by-step drawing process at the end, but for now, just keep this in mind. On the palm side, the skin webbing creates a visual floor for the fingers, but the actual bone hinge sits much deeper than you might think. If we look from the side, you can see how the webbing slants upward from the palm toward the back. This bridge of skin is exactly why the finger looks shorter from the front than it does from behind. Because the hinge and the first segment of the finger bone, colored here in yellow, actually sit inside the palm, the finger doesn't fold at the webbing when it bends. It hinges much lower down, right here at the metacarpal head, causing the upper third of the palm to bend as well. Pay close attention to the webbing when the fingers are open. It's tempting to draw a sharp V where they meet, but they actually form a soft U shape. Remembering this prevents the fingers from looking like they're just glued together at a single point. Rule number 2, the knuckle hierarchy. It's a common mistake to draw knuckles in a straight, horizontal line. In reality, they form a distinct arc. If we look inside the hand at the hinge zone, you can see why. The 4 metacarpal bones are arranged like a fan or a bridge. The middle knuckle is the peak of this arc and is usually the most prominent. From that peak, the arc slopes down toward the index finger on one side and down toward the ring and pinky fingers on the other. This knuckle hierarchy is essential. It's the foundation that gives the rest of the hand its organic, curved shape. Next, rule number 3, the palm topography. Think of this as a map of the hand's terrain. We use a central midline to divide the palm, and specific flex zones to identify the hills and valleys of the surface whenever the hand is in motion. Notice this top third, the flex zone. This is the primary folding point for a grip. The creases you see here are actually created by the metacarpal hinges we located earlier. Now let's map the muscles. On one side, the thumb muscle forms a large oval that approximately reaches the midpoint of the palm. On the opposite side, the pinky muscle slopes down from the finger all the way to the wrist. When drawing contours, you'll often see these 2 masses converge at the base. Only the center valley of the palm remains relatively rigid. While we're mapping out the topography, let's flip to the back of the hand. You'll often see these distinct lines running from the knuckles down to the wrist. A common mistake is thinking these are the bones. They're actually the extensor tendons. Notice how they aren't perfectly parallel. They all converge toward the center of the wrist. Keep your lines light here. You usually only want to emphasize them when the person is either very skinny, older, or if the hand is strained and the fingers are spread wide. Rule number 4, finger divisions and variations. Within our top rectangle, we divide the space into 4 vertical columns. These are a rough guide for where the fingers sit. But keep in mind, fingers aren't as wide as the columns. As they move toward the tips, they tend to converge slightly toward a center point. Each finger is split into 3 segments. Usually they get shorter as you move toward the tip, following the bones beneath. But keep in mind, skin creases don't sit exactly where the bone joints are. They're slightly offset to allow the skin to bunch up when you grip. This is why the longest to shortest rule is not always true for each finger. Because of where those creases sit, and the fact that the fleshy pad of the fingertip extends beyond the bone, the segments we see can vary. While the bottom is usually the longest, it's very common, especially on the pinky and ring fingers, for the tip to look just as long, or even longer, than the middle section. Depending on your style, it's fine to keep it generic and simple and use equal thirds, or make each segment slightly shorter as you go up. But if you're aiming for realism, take a close look at your own hand or your reference. Pay attention to how that fingertip padding and those crease offsets change the proportions. Just like the base knuckles, these joint creases also form a series of arcs across the hand. Never draw them as straight horizontal lines. The pinky's tip usually reaches right around the last crease of the ring finger. For the index and ring fingers, biology gives us an interesting hint known as the index-to-ring ratio, or the 2D to 4D ratio. It's a scientific way of saying that these relative lengths vary. A ring finger that is noticeably longer than the index finger is more common in men, while women tend to have index and ring fingers that are nearly equal, or an index finger that is slightly longer. Finally, our scale check. The width of your palm usually equals the length of your middle finger, measured from the visible base to the tip. Use this to keep your proportions in check. Rule number 5, the thumb. The thumb is our outlier because it operates on its own plane. Remember that thumb oval from our muscle map? That mass is the base of the thumb's movement. Unlike the other fingers, the thumb only has 2 visible segments extending from the palm. These 2 sections are typically about the same length. As a rule of thumb, so to speak, the tip usually reaches about half to 3/4 of the way up the first segment of the index finger. Finally, watch the rotation. When the thumb is tucked flat against the side, it's usually at a 3/4 angle. But if you move it forward so the base muscle bulges, it rotates into a side view. Matching the thumb's rotation to the muscle's tension is what makes a hand look truly alive. Finally, a small tip for life. When the thumb is stretched out, avoid drawing it as a perfectly straight line. Adding a subtle outward curve to the top section gives the hand a sense of organic tension. Now let's put these rules into action. Remember, you can always adjust these proportions to fit your specific character. We start with our 1-to-1 double box. Set the height of your palm, then stack that same height on top for the fingers. As we discussed, the width of the hand is roughly equal to the length of the middle finger. But since the base of the fingers is arched and doesn't sit flat on the midline, the actual width will look something like this. You don't need to stay stuck inside rigid rectangles. You can always choose to sketch a more organic shape for the palm and finger block. Next, let's map out the palm. I'll start with the thumb muscle. Draw that oval in the bottom 2/3 of the palm, reaching toward the midline. If you're drawing from the back view, only part of this mass is visible, so I often use a simple triangle to represent that section instead. On the palm side, add those creases across the top third and indicate the muscle pad that flows from the pinky down toward the wrist. On the back of the hand, keep the knuckles as well as the tendons converging toward the wrist in mind. Now, onto the fingers. Now divide that top block into 4 columns. Adjust the length of each finger based on the 2D to 4D ratio, divide them into thirds, and sketch the segments. As mentioned earlier, the pinky's tip usually reaches right around the last crease of the ring finger. This keeps it from looking too long or out of proportion. Time for the thumb. I like to add a small triangle at the base where the bone sticks out. Use the first crease of the index finger as a guide for where to place the tip, and keep the thumb's 2 visible segments roughly equal in length. Be mindful of the overall curves of the palm on both the thumb and pinky sides. Finally, add the wrist and we're done mapping out the hand. Now, refine your shapes and clean up the lines. Depending on your style, you can lean into the anatomical details, or keep it simple and selective with your line work. This covers our basic blueprint. I have a lot more useful information to share on hands and other topics, so if you found this helpful, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell to support the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.